Have you ever tried to meditate? You might have found it easy, but it's more likely that you found it challenging, at least at first. But there are deep gifts in stillness, and those gifts can help you on your journey to prosperity. They can help you a lot. Let's take a look. This is Prosperity and Something Greater. My guest today is Brian Beckcom. He's a personal injury attorney who practices in Houston, Texas. And one of his areas is maritime injuries and the law around all of that. And he successfully represented Captain Phillips, whose ship was attacked by Somali pirates. You might remember this. Tom Hanks played Captain Phillips in the movie version. So anyway, I thought, because of that for a while, first of all, Brian's kind of cool. But I'm also a really big fan of his because he loves to write about mindset, which is one of my favorite topics. And I learn from his blogs and posts. And you can too, by the way. You can find them at vbattorneys.com. That's Victor Bravo Attorneys with a YS.com. I enjoyed every minute in recording this podcast with Brian, and I know you will too. So let's meet him. Welcome, Brian. It is absolutely a delight to have you here with me today on Prosperity and Something Greater. Thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Rem.
Well, I made an original list of guests that I wanted to have on Prosperity and Something Greater, and you were very high on that list, primarily just because of all of the things that I see that you publish, far beyond your practice and all the things that you do, just in terms of, a really positive mindset. And I'm a fan, actually. So I just wanted to get you on here and talk to you about this topic. So it's great. Let's just jump into it, okay?
Yeah, sure.
So, Brian, how would you define prosperity for you?
Yeah, great question. And I've thought about this for a very long time. And I think the short answer is my definition has changed over time. When I was younger, and when I say younger, I would say right when I was getting into my profession, which is the legal profession, I would have defined prosperity as essentially tantamount to wealth or money, or it would have had a big component. It would have had a big financial component to it. And after my first job, I went to work at a small firm where the owner of the business was extremely financially successful. I mean, you go on down the line. He had a brand new car every 3 months. He had the biggest house in the nicest neighborhood in town. He owned this beautiful law office, and he was miserable. He was just miserable all the time. And I worked for this person for 2 years, and I was frankly miserable for most of the time I was working for him. And then I went off and started my own firm. And after a few years, my wife and I started spending about a month and a half in Colorado every summer with our kids. And I remember walking around. I remember this very distinctly, Rem. I remember exactly where I was when I thought this. I was walking around in Colorado in like one of those beautiful mountain villages with beautiful weather in the middle of the day, young kids with me. They're doing their thing. And I just remember thinking, wealth has nothing to do with money, or prosperity has nothing to do with money. Prosperity to me is about freedom and independence and being able to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, with the people you want to do it with. And I remember just having this thought and thinking, because, like a lot of type A personalities, I'm very competitive. I played sports in high school and college, and I want to win. And, when you see other people with bigger houses and faster cars and what looks to be more successful businesses, that can create some envy if your criteria for judging it is about the money. But if your criteria for judging it is about something else, for example, like what I'm talking about, freedom, independence, being able to do what you want to do when you want to do it, then none of that stuff matters, because you're no longer comparing yourself to people based on these arbitrary kind of conventional society ideas of success. I mean, I totally, at this point in my life, reject the idea that success has anything to do at all with money. Now, I think business owners need to make money, okay? And I have absolutely no problem with making money as long as you're honest about the way you do it. And I think people should try and strive to make as much money as they can, as long as that doesn't become the only point. So, for example, I know for beyond any shadow of a doubt, I could double my income or triple my income if I doubled or tripled the amount of time I worked. But I have 3 kids, 2 teenagers and a 12-year-old daughter, two boys that are teenagers, a 12-year-old daughter. And I decided years ago that was going to be my priority. My priority was not going to be about making money. So, but other people make different decisions. And from my observations, I'm 47 years old now. The people that put the money or the status of being the most, quote, successful in your industry, they tend to be unhappy. And the people that have values, the people that define prosperity by something other than that, something that's really meaningful to them personally, they tend, this is just my observation, they tend to be happier. So that's a long way of saying that, to me, prosperity equals freedom and independence, and to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, with who you want to do it.
That's something that many folks I've talked to on this topic will bring up. And very often they'll bring up that, well, you might have thought it was money, but it's really not money. And most of us have sorted out the money and realized there's levels of money and how much you might have. But the idea of freedom and independence, in episode 1, I talk about the man on the other side of the desk. It's a great story from Wendell Berry about the barber. And, he just decided he never wanted to have the man, because he grew up in an orphanage, and he never wanted the man on the other side of the desk to be able to tell him what was going to happen. And to have that kind of freedom that you're talking about is very, very integral, I think, to real happiness, which is a definite component of prosperity. So what was the defining moment or event that, brought you to your really very interesting career path?
Yeah. So so I'm a personal injury wrongful death trial lawyer, and I have no lawyers in my family as far back as I can. I'm talking about generations. I've looked back, no lawyers. So I'm the first lawyer that I know of. And so I majored in computer science and philosophy. I went to Texas A&M University, and I tell people, I said, I spent 4 years behind a computer screen programming in a computer lab, and I decided to go to law school because I wanted to get in front of people and talk, and I didn't want to be in front of a computer all day long. And 25 years later, I'm in front of a computer all day long. So, but I've always liked to write. I've always liked to read. And I've always liked to talk. And so that's basically what I thought lawyers did. So I went to law school, and I went to the University of Texas Law School, which is generally considered to be one of the top law schools in the country. The University of Texas Law School, though, when I was there at least, if you did well, and I did pretty well, you were expected to go work at a big defense law firm. Like, I didn't even know there were any other options. And so I went and interviewed with all these big defense firms, and I got a job at plenty of them. And I accepted a job with a firm that at the time was the biggest firm in the state of Texas, Fulbright and Jaworski. And I was there for a couple of years, and, it just didn't feel right to me. There was multiple reasons for that. It was a great firm with great people there. I learned a ton, but for me personally, it wasn't a long-term deal. And maybe most significantly, I had a very significant event happen in my childhood. My mother died when I was 10. And so I was raised by my father, who was at the time an Air Force officer. And she died as a result of some really, really obvious and bad negligence. And so and I didn't know this at the time because I was too young, and my dad kept this from me and my brother. I had a little brother at the time, but my dad sued the United States government for killing my mother and won. And I didn't even know about this until at least 10 years later, because, again, I was 10 years old and my dad kept this from me. But I remember when I was a first year lawyer, my wife called me up and she said, "Have you ever read your mom's legal opinion?" And I said, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, it's online, Beckcom versus United States." I said, "No, I've never read it." And so I pulled it up and I read it. And there's all these quotes from my mother talking about how much she was the thing that was most important to her was her boys. Because see, at the time when the case was brought, she was still alive. She died in the middle of the case. And so she was able to give testimony. But in any event, it was almost like, people are like, "Oh gosh, that must have been so sad." And I was like, I tell people, I say, it was actually the opposite, because it was almost like I got a chance to hear from my mother 25 years or so, or I guess it would be a little less than that, 20 years after her death. But anyway, it wasn't a huge win, but it was enough money that my dad, on an Air Force salary, which was not that significant, was able to send my brother and I to college and me to law school without us having a ton of debt. So it really impacted us financially and also emotionally. And anyways, after I became a lawyer, I actually called the lawyer that represented my mom and dad in that case. We lived in New York at the time. I was calling from Texas, and he was he was retired, about 75 years old. I called him at night one time and I said, "Hey," his name was Bob. I said, "Hey, Bob, you're probably not going to remember me, but my name is Brian Beckcom. You represented my mom and dad and brother and I in a case, 20 plus years ago." And he said, "You know what? I'll never forget that case for as long." He remembered that case. He said, I remember that case like it was yesterday." And I said, "Hey, I just wanted you to know that what you did for my family enabled me and my brother to go to college. It enabled me to go to law school, and it enabled me to do what I'm doing now, which is exactly what you did for my family. I'm doing the same thing, 25 years after the fact." So in some ways, in this realm, this wasn't some, conscious idea when I was 11 or 12 that I was going to become a crusading plaintiff's trial lawyer, but subconsciously, clearly, it had a big influence on me. And so that probably the death of my mother is probably the defining event as far as what I'm doing today. But there were a lot of other things that kind of led up to it. When I was in the Corps, at A&M, I was in a ROTC program, which is similar to West Point, and then it's 24 hours a day. It's called the Corps Cadets, and I was in a leadership position, and I was able to help cadets that were being accused of various violations of school rules and stuff. And I never enjoyed helping the big institution. I always enjoyed helping the small business or the person or the individual. So kind of a confluence of things led me to where I am today. A lot of it, frankly, is probably luck. A lot of it is probably just, being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I don't believe in luck. I do think all of us are at the right place at the right time. The question is, are we prepared to see it and move forward and take the risk, have the courage, do the thing? Yeah. And well, thank you for sharing that. I've known you a long time. I never heard that story. Yeah. And thank you.
Yeah.
Very much.
You're welcome.
So let's shift gears a little bit. We all have challenges and obstacles we face, every single one of us. And so can you share what you deal with on your daily journey? What can trip you up?
Yeah. I probably, and I think a lot of your listeners will relate to this. My biggest probably challenge on a daily basis is I'm my own worst critic. Like if somebody talked to me the way I talk to myself, my mental chatter, they would be my worst enemy, right? I mean, my brain is constantly pushing me to do better. And, hey, why'd you do this? And you stayed up too late last night and you had that third glass of wine, you idiot. And why aren't you working out harder? And, oh, you gained 4 pounds during the pandemic. What the heck is wrong with you? So probably, I have plenty of obstacles to overcome, but the one that comes to mind for me is this internal voice that a lot of us have that is good insofar as it pushes you to do the right thing. It pushes you to try to be successful, to try to contribute to society in a positive way, but it's bad. And then it can be totally and completely irrational. And so I try very hard and have tried very hard over the past 5 years or so to be very aware of what's going on in my own head. And in particular, that voice that is the constant critic. And, there's all sorts of different tricks you can do to help with that. But one of the things is, you can name your internal critic, and you can name your internal critic something stupid and funny. So, you can call him Stupid Steve or something. So, every time the critic comes up and, there's Stupid Steve, you immediately kind of disconnect from, being caught up in your own thoughts, and you can kind of look more dispassionately at some of the criticism that your internal, that internal voice in your head is giving you. So that to me is probably the biggest obstacle on kind of a day-to-day basis that I have to overcome. And then kind of bigger term, I think that people like you, people like me, people like probably a lot of your listeners are very curious about a lot of different things. Once you've been doing a certain type of work for a certain amount of time, it can get repetitive. It can get boring. You can lose your motivation a little bit. And so keeping it fresh, finding ways to make whatever it is you're doing exciting, being curious, keeping that passion. Sometimes you just don't have the passion. Sometimes you just have to show up and do the work and not complain about it. Kind of the bigger term thing is you have to have some sort of, people call them goals. It's really like, to me, it's more like a compass. It's like a way of kind of knowing your purpose and having a direction long term in which you're going. So I'm constantly trying to adjust my compass, make sure my compass is pointing in the direction that I want it to point. That seems to be something that takes up a lot of my thoughts, frankly.
Well, me too. I'll tell you, before we went on the air, one of the things I told you, I wanted to say thank you for doing this. I'm going to send you a copy of my book. And one of the chapters is called What You Can Learn from Your Inner 6-Year-Old. And
nice.
This is something that I developed myself.
Yeah.
After I was inspired by a story that I had heard that was very different, but a long time ago, I just came up with this thought: what if you could spend this Saturday with yourself as a 6-year-old? You drive up to your house, you'd be on the doorstep waiting, mom have you all set up, and you'd strap you in, we'd go for a ride in a car. What do you want to do today? And, you'd tell yourself, but you already knew because it's you. And, how would you act with yourself on that day? How would you talk to yourself as a 6-year-old? I always joke, you might say, okay, all right, now I want to talk to you about something called Google. Now, when that shows up, and just buy, whatever you try this stuff, and the 6-year-old be like, can I have an ice cream cone or whatever?
Yeah.
Don't go out with this girl. It'll save you so much heartache, and again, no luck.
Yeah.
But you might say, wait till you meet your kids. You're going to be a lawyer, and you're not going to believe how you're going to help people and what you're going to accomplish. It's wonderful, and you might say, and I love you, and I promise you, I'll be there with you every day, and I will be by your side. I will never let you down. And, and your little 6-year-old would look up and believe every word you say. Yeah. And so what I just say now is, when you have that internal dialogue, shrink yourself down to 6-year-old Brian, talk to yourself then. And you just can't do it.
Yeah.
Stupid Steve disappears. He just evaporates, because you would never let stupid Steve on that little 6-year-old that there's there. So that's the first thing. Actually, that's one of the chapters of my book. We're illustrating it. My daughter's illustrating it. We're going to make that its own standalone book.
Nice. That's awesome. I love that.
And there's another really incredible book called The Fred Factor. You ever read it?
I haven't, but it sounds really familiar.
I think it's Mark Sanborn, I think, is the author. It's about a guy who moves into a neighborhood, and his postman shows up. His name's Fred. And he's like knocking on the door. How can I help you? And he tells the story about this incredible service and dedication and interest on the part of his postal carrier. I mean, if there ever was a job that is, routine and mundane, it's the postal service. And I mean, there's famously, people snap because of how it goes. And the whole point of that book, it's so short, and you give it to everybody in your staff, and you should all study it, is one of the ways to overcome that feeling of like, well, here we go again, which is, everyone's work is repetitive in some particular way, is that that feeling of deep and abiding gratitude to be able to have the ability and the right and the skills to serve people. And every day is brand new. So I highly recommend you pick that up. You read it in like 2 hours.
Nice.
So we've talked a little bit about, trying to take care of yourself and not, beat yourself up and be that critical, because what did you really do to deserve all that punishment? Nothing. But what's the top strategy that you kind of use to keep you headed in the right direction and not slipping back into those old habits?
Yeah. So for at least 6 years, maybe a little bit longer, I've been a meditator, and I can just say, there's been a lot of great things that have happened in my life. I've been very, very fortunate, but meditation is probably the most important thing I have done in my adult life. Setting aside the woman I ultimately married, that was an extremely important decision that turned out well. But, setting aside stuff like that, meditation is absolutely the most important thing that I've ever done in my adult life. I think everybody in the world should be a meditator. I think the world will be a far better place if everybody had some sort of meditation practice. And, 10 years ago, if somebody would have been saying you should meditate, I would think, well, that's some sort of woohoo, new age nonsense, and I'm just not going to do that. I would have had the completely wrong idea about meditation. I also would have thought, oh, hey, when you meditate, the idea is to stop your thoughts, which is impossible. You cannot do it. And the more you try to do it, the worse it gets. And so I think what happens with a lot of people, they have these misperceptions about meditation. And so when they try it, one of the first things you'll realize when you meditate, this is like, they're literally stages to realization when you really get into it. And I'm really, really into it. Meditated for 45 minutes this morning, for example. But one of the things you'll realize is there are identifiable stages. In the first stage, when you first start meditating, the first thing you'll realize is what they call monkey mind, which means you can't stop your thoughts. You literally cannot stop them. And they're just constantly going and going and going. But meditation is not about some woohoo, spirituality. It can be, I suppose. But what meditation really is a 2,000-year-old practice that has been scientifically proven again and again and again to make your entire the entire way you view the world a little bit better. And so the way I got into meditation, Rem, was 6 or 7 years ago. I was going through a very stressful time at work. Started to have panic attacks. And I've written about this publicly, by the way. And the panic attack, if you never had a panic, my first panic attack, I'll never forget. I was sitting, and my kids were young. I was watching them. My wife was off doing something. And all of a sudden, my hand started tingling. I thought I was having a stroke. And so I called my father-in-law and said, hey, can you come watch the boys? I'm going to go to the doctor. I went to the doctor. They did all these tests. Nothing wrong with you. The end, the doctor said, do you have any particular unique stresses in your life right now? And I said, well, I'm about to go to trial for 6 weeks out of town, and my wife is pregnant, eight and a half months pregnant with my first daughter. And he goes, well, you had a panic attack. And so he gave me some Xanax, which I never took. And I started having panic attacks about having panic attacks. This went on for about a year. And of course, I was too stupid as a male to go and get help. And so I found help through meditation, and specifically through a book called 10% Happier by a guy named Dan Brown, who was an NBC, I think it was NBC, national newscaster who had a panic attack on air with millions of people watching. And he started meditating. He wrote this book about it. And I was like, man, I got to try this out. And again, that was 6 or 7 years ago. Now I probably logged a couple thousand hours worth of meditation. But the point of meditation is not to stop your thoughts. It's not some sort of spirituality thing. The point of meditation is there's various things you could say, but fundamentally it's about understanding how your own mind works and getting some distance between your thoughts and your awareness. Your thoughts are they don't exist. They're not real. They're just energy patterns in your head. But what most people do most of the time is they walk around thinking their thoughts are real. They're like identified with their thoughts. And meditation gives you just a little bit of distance between your thoughts and what reality is it makes it very hard to get mad. I mean, let's say you lose your temper, if you are aware of the fact that you're losing your temper, it is literally impossible to continue to be mad. The only way you can continue to be mad is to continue to feed yourself these thought loops. And that when you're feeding yourself those thought loops, you're just not being mindful. And so meditation it's a mental exercise. There's no difference really between physical exercise where you're building your muscles and mental exercise where you're building your mental muscles. And so to me, it's an easy, when you say what's the most important thing or what's something you would strongly recommend to people to deal with a day-to-day life, to me, the answer is easy. It's meditation. It's by far the most profound thing I've done in my adult life.
That's one of the best descriptions I've heard of meditation from anybody. It's really great.
I've thought about it a lot. The more you meditate, the more you tend to reach these breakthroughs. And, some of the breakthroughs are absolutely some of the most profound things I've ever experienced in my life.
That's inspiring.
Yeah.
That's truly inspiring. Okay. Well, let's move on. The people listening to this podcast are interested in really achieving their own version of prosperity. Beyond all the really great advice we've given them already, is there anything in addition you could share?
Yeah. So I've written a lot about happiness, right? And so I used to think that it would be a relatively good compass or goal to figure out what makes you happy and try to do more of that. Figure out what makes you unhappy and try to do less of that. Well, it turns out, ironically, that the pursuit of happiness causes unhappiness. The pursuit of wealth causes unhappiness. The pursuit of these kinds of superficial kind of societal driven values doesn't really get you to where you want to be. I'll give you a good example of this, Rem, and maybe some of your listeners will appreciate this. I had this kind of pretty, for me at least, profound insight in January, early January this year, which seems like, by the way, 20 years ago through this pandemic.
It does, doesn't it? It really does.
But I remember we were my partner and I were sitting down trying to figure out financially what we were going to do at the end of the year, money, how much we were going to put back into the business, what we're going to do with bonuses for the team, how much we were going to pay each other, stuff like that. And I just all of a sudden realized I have everything I want. Like I have what I want already. And what am I going to do with more money? I'm just going to throw it in the bank account. I mean, I drive the car I want to drive. I live in the house I want to live in with the woman that I want to be married to, with 3 kids. I live in the neighborhood I want to live in. I have friends I want to hang out with. And the reason I'm saying this is because as somebody who is a type A striving personality, I'd never felt like that my entire life. I'd always felt like more, I got to do better and better and better. And that, again, that's part of that competitive thing. And I still have that. And this is not to say that I'm ready to hang it up at all. I'm excited and motivated at 47 as I've ever been in my life. The point is, what I was striving for some of the time, all this striving can sometimes blind you to the fact that you have what you want already. So I heard this. There was 2 guys talking. There's this little saying about this, and they're talking about this really rich billionaire. And one guy turns to the other guy and says, I have something that guy will never have. And he's like, what? That guy's got billions of dollars. What could you possibly have that he doesn't have? And he said, I have enough. And that really stuck with me. And so it really was pretty profound for me because, like a lot of your listeners, they're very type A. They're high energy, successful, driven people. And I am too. But you got to balance that. And so for me, the balance was recognizing that I don't have to wait until I'm 65 to look around and say, okay, now I've reached the goal. I've reached the top of the mountain. I'm 65. I've reached all my goals. Here I am. That's not the way life works. Even if you wanted it to work that way, it wouldn't work that way. And so I kind of just looked around at 47 in early January and said, It's not, I for sure want to be more successful. Absolutely. I for sure want to make my business better and better, more profitable. But that's not the number one goal. It kind of made me realize that being grateful for what you have, it's a little bit of a cliche, but being grateful for what you have is a far faster route to contentment and tranquility than, the just mindless pursuit of money.
I've heard a quote, and it's, money can't make you happy, but being happy can make you an awful lot of money.
I love it. I like that.
And actually, I'm the person that said that. I thought I couldn't possibly be the first person to say that, but I really tried hard to find somebody else. And so that's my own little quote.
Nice.
But I think that's really where, all of that flows from, the choice of happiness.
Yeah.
All right. So I've got this great question I ask everybody. And so if you were a toy, any toy at all, what would it be and why?
This is one of those, it's like the pizza topping question. It's one of those questions that you think about and you kind of want to give one answer, or maybe, and then, you're like, oh, is the interviewer asking for a particular answer so they can kind of psychoanalyze, what it would be like to be this particular pizza topping or this particular toy. But, to me, this question makes me think back to what kind of toys did I really enjoy playing with when I was a little boy, right? And so I've always had something of a fertile imagination, and I liked army men. And do you remember the little plastic army men that had the little base? Their feet were connected, and there was a little base, and you could put them, and you'd have big wars. And you think about how low tech this stuff is, but you could have a whole army and another army, and you could go outside and have them, in the dirt or in the trees or wherever you are. And, each one would come to life, and it would be like you were in the middle of the Battle of the Bulge, or, some battle in World War I, or it just the fun I had with those little army men, those little plastic army men. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Oh, I had them. I totally, yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Just an absolute joy to play with as a kid. And, one of the things, and I'm not one of these people that really is worried about this generation. Like I said, I have a 16-year-old boy, 14-year-old boy, 12-year-old daughter. So I see what this generation is doing. I see what they're doing with the internet and all that sort of thing. And I'm not as worried about it as some. But what I do think about sometimes is when you take 100 of these little plastic army men and you walk out 2 miles into the woods as a 6-year-old or 7-year-old kid, and you spend 2 hours recreating D-Day or something like that, man, how good is that for your creative capacity in your brain? And so I do worry a little bit that the way I look at technology is we're constantly being bombarded with input, information coming in. We need some time where that is paused. We have to have space to think. And so for me, it's meditation, hikes, things like that. But for kids nowadays, I'm not sure they have quite enough time. They don't have the pause in the bombardment of incoming information that I think they need.
Yeah, that kind of activity. I had those. And it's funny, you set them up and they're totally static. You barely move them, but in your mind, the whole thing's going on, the conversations. Yeah. I had a little guy, I think he was about 8 inches tall. He was called Major Matt Mason. He was an astronaut.
Nice.
I actually heard Tom Hanks talk about that. Tom Hanks and I are pretty close in age. He had a Major Matt Mason. I'm like, wow, yeah, so did I. And all he had was like a helmet that would come on and off. Maybe there were other pieces. I don't remember it. But I would lay beside my bed. And so there would be there's the under area. Under the bed was this great, dark cavernous thing. And then you could get up on top and there was mountains. And I would spend hours playing with Major Matt Mason in that way. Yeah. Well, I love that. That's great. I think those army men, they made it into Toy Story. I think they're some of the.
I think they did. Characters. I remember it. Yeah, for sure. They were kind of the frontline pawns in the Toy Story narrative.
Exactly. Right. They were always helping out. Yeah. Come on now. That's I'm thinking. Yeah, that's how they talk. Yeah. Right. One last question. Now, we've already mentioned a bunch of them and you've already suggested a couple, but is there any other like really great book that just one you could recommend that everybody should read?
Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. So I probably read at least 100 books a year and have for 25 years. I've always loved to read. I'd read constantly. And so I've read a lot of books in my life, fiction and nonfiction. But there's books that really stand out. And to me, the books that stand out the most are the books that basically instantaneously and completely changed the way I looked at some component of the world. That to me is like the most exciting thing about reading a book is finding out something, either finding out something that you were completely wrong about. Like I love that. I love finding out that I was wrong about something, or finding out about something you had never even considered. And so Sapiens is one of those books. It's one of those books that will literally reframe the way you look at humanity. So that would be probably the book that I would recommend to people. It's a thrilling book, basically about the history of the human race and what we're looking at in terms of the future. So really good book. Highly recommend it.
I've never heard of it, and it will be ordered from Amazon in 15 minutes. Nice. So thank you for that. That's great.
You got it.
Brian, thanks for everything. I really want to thank you for spending the time. I've enjoyed this immensely, and I so appreciate your time and effort with this. And I just loved the conversation. We've definitely dug into it, and thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on, Rem. I've enjoyed it too, and it's great to see you again. It's been a little while. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. You look great.
Thanks. Yeah, I got a lot of hair right now, but I tried to comb it. But we're all dealing with that. So, all right, my friend, I will see you soon. And I think I'm going to join you on your podcast at some point. So that's great.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks, Rem.
Now you know why I enjoyed interviewing Brian so much. This is someone who has really looked at what is of value in life and what doesn't bring the joy or the happiness often promised. And he is in the ring every day fighting the good fight and engaged in the world. You can do both. W. Somerset Maugham wrote that this path is as narrow and difficult to walk as a razor's edge. It takes intention, and I would say wisdom. Listening to Brian, I would say it is certainly worth it. Prosperity, flourishing and thriving, freedom, being good to yourself, finding the gifts in stillness, having enough. I'm on a journey to discover as much about prosperity as I can and to share it with you. And today, I learned a lot. I hope you did too. Let me know what you think. You can send me an email at rem@toppractices.com. Prosperity is the entire focus of what we do at Top Practices. Most doctors are struggling with the business of medicine, and those that aren't really understand that through association with other successful practitioners, they can take their success to the next level or something even greater, like prosperity. Prosperity in business is a function of mindset, marketing, and management. And that's our mission at Top Practices. You can find out more at toppractices.com, our marketing and management programs for doctors, our workshops, and annual summit. Well, until next time, this is Rem Jackson. Smile when you wake up, and then have a really great day. Nothing is more important.